The heart monitor was the only thing screaming louder than the chief of surgery. On the trauma bed lay a man with 3 bullet holes in his chest and a jagged piece of metal held tight in his hand, pressed directly against the surgeon's jugular. The entire ER had frozen. SWAT was 5 minutes out. The wounded man, a Navy SEAL with eyes like shattered glass, wasn't asking for a priest, a doctor, or a lawyer. He was whispering one name, over and over like a prayer or a curse. He didn't want the best surgeon in the state. He wanted the quiet nurse from the night shift who nobody noticed. And when you hear why, it will break you. It was raining in Virginia Beach, the kind of relentless sheet metal rain that drowned out the sound of sirens until they were right on top of you. At St. Mary's Trauma Center, the sliding doors hissed open, admitting a gust of wet wind and the frantic shouting of paramedics. It was 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The graveyard shift was usually the domain of drunks, overdoses, and the occasional car wreck. But tonight, the air pressure in the room shifted instantly. "Move! Move! I need a trauma bay, now!" The lead paramedic, a veteran named Kowalski, was covered in blood that wasn't his. He was pushing a gurney with a frantic desperation that terrified the interns. "What do we have?" Dr. Adrian Finch demanded, snapping his gloves on. Finch was the attending trauma surgeon, brilliant, arrogant, and currently annoyed that his nap had been interrupted. He swept his hair back, stepping into the light of Trauma Bay 1. Male, mid-30s, gunshot wounds to the thorax and upper abdomen, heavy caliber. BP is 80/40 and dropping. Tachycardic at 140. "We lost a pulse twice in the rig," Kowalski shouted, unhooking the oxygen tank. "He's a SEAL, team guy, found in a ditch off the I-264. Finch's eyes narrowed. "Get him on the monitors. Cut the clothes. I want 2 large-bore IVs, O negative on the rapid infuser. Page anesthesia and get the OR prepped. We're opening him up." The team swarmed. Scissors sheared through the heavy, soaked tactical fabric. The patient was a wall of muscle, his body a map of old scars and fresh, bubbling wounds. He was pale, that translucent grey that screams exsanguination. "Sir, can you hear me?" Finch yelled, leaning over the patient, shining a penlight into his eyes. "I'm Dr. Finch. We're going to help you." The SEAL's eyes snapped open. They weren't the eyes of a dying man. They were the eyes of a predator cornered in a cage. In a blur of motion that defied his blood pressure, the SEAL's right hand shot up. He wasn't unarmed. Somewhere between the ditch and the hospital, he had palmed a 4-inch shard of twisted metal, debris from whatever hell he had crawled out of. He didn't slash. He hooked. The metal tip dug into the soft flesh, just under Dr. Finch's jawline. "Back off," the SEAL rasped. His voice was wet, bubbling with blood. But the command was absolute. The trauma team froze. Nurse Baker dropped a tray of instruments. The clang sounded like a gunshot. "Whoa, whoa," Finch froze, his hands in the air, his eyes wide with shock. He could feel the cold metal pricking his skin. "Sedate him! Someone sedate him!" "Touch me," the SEAL growled, his teeth gritted in agony, "and I open his throat." He scanned the room, his vision blurring, sweat pouring down a face etched with grime and war paint. He looked at the terrified faces of the residents, the nurses, the security guard reaching for his taser. "Don't," the SEAL warned the guard. "I'll kill him before you clear the holster." "What do you want?" Finch stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "You're bleeding to death. You have minutes, soldier. Let us work." "No doctors," the SEAL wheezed. He coughed, a spray of red misting the air. Protocol 9. "We don't know what that means," Finch yelled. The SEAL's grip tightened. A trickle of blood ran down Finch's neck. The SEAL's head lolled back for a second, fighting unconsciousness, fighting the darkness that wanted to swallow him. He forced his eyes back to the terrified surgeon. "Sarah," he whispered. Finch blinked. "What?" "Get Sarah," the SEAL gasped. "We have 3 Sarahs working tonight. Nurse Baker cried out from the corner. "Which one?" The SEAL's eyes started to roll back, but the hand holding the weapon didn't waver. It was muscle memory. It was training. It was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. "The one," he choked out, "who knows about Kandahar." 3 floors up, in the hushed, pastel-colored hallways of the pediatric ward, Sarah O'Connell was folding a blanket. She was 42, though her eyes looked 1,000 years old. She wore light blue scrubs with cartoon bears on them. She was the nurse you didn't notice. She was the one who stocked the supply closets, who sat with the crying babies when their parents went for a smoke, who made the coffee that tasted slightly better than sludge. She was reliable, boring, invisible. Most of the staff at St. Mary's thought she was a divorcee from Ohio who liked knitting. They knew she had a slight limp in her left leg when it rained, which she attributed to a car accident in her 20s. They knew she never dated, never went to the staff happy hours, and never, ever talked about politics or the news. "Sarah?" She turned. It was Dr. Gorman, the pediatric resident. He looked pale. "Yeah, Dr. G. Need help with the IV in room 304? Her voice was soft, maternal. "No," Gorman said, breathless. "Security is here. They need you in the ER." Sarah frowned, placing the folded blanket on the warmer. "The ER? I haven't worked trauma in 6 years. I'm not certified for—" "They said you specifically," Gorman said, stepping aside as 2 hospital security guards flanked the doorway. They looked serious. "Miss O'Connell," the lead guard said, "please come with us, immediately." "Is there a child?" Sarah asked, her heart doing a strange, slow thud in her chest. A feeling she hadn't felt in a decade began to creep up her spine. The feeling of the sand, the heat, the noise. "No, Mum, it's a hostage situation," the guard said, grabbing her arm gently but firmly. "The perpetrator is asking for Sarah, who knows about Kandahar." Sarah O'Connell didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She went deadly still. The soft, maternal nurse vanished. Her posture changed instantly. The slump in her shoulders corrected. Her chin lifted. The way she stood, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, was not the stance of a pediatric nurse. "Kandahar," she repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Yes, ma'am. He's got a shiv to doctor. Finch's throat. He's dying, but he won't let anyone touch him." Sarah stripped off her stethoscope, the one with the little plush duck on it, and hung it on the door handle. "Did he give a name?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave, losing its soft Midwestern lilt. It was harder now. Cold. "No ID," the guard said as they rushed her towards the elevators. "Just a big guy, military, messed up bad." Sarah closed her eyes as the elevator doors chimed. Declan. It had to be Declan. He was the only one left. "Take me to him," she said. She didn't look at the guards. She looked at the reflection in the steel doors, checking her face. She needed to bury Sarah, the pediatric nurse. She needed to find the woman she had buried 10 years ago. She needed to become Ghost again. The trauma bay was a circle of terror. The police had arrived. 2 officers with guns drawn, aiming at the dying man on the table. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" one officer screamed. "Back off!" "Whore!" Finch shrieked, his voice cracking. "He'll cut me! Don't shoot!" The SEAL, Declan Hayes, was fading fast. His skin was the color of old paper. The monitor was alarming a chaotic rhythm, V-tac. He was going to code any second. "Clear the room!" The voice cracked through the chaos like a whip. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. The officers turned. Dr. Finch tried to turn his head. Sarah O'Connell stood at the entrance of the trauma bay, but she didn't look like Sarah. She had ripped the sleeves off her scrub top, tying the excess fabric around her hair to pull it back tight. She had grabbed a pair of trauma shears from a crash cart and held them loose in her hand, not as a tool, but as an extension of her will. "I said," Sarah walked forward, ignoring the guns pointed in her general direction. "Clear the room. Officers, holsters, now." "Ma'am, stay back," the cop started. Sarah didn't even look at him. She locked eyes with the man on the table. "Commander Hayes," she said. Her voice was steel. "Status." The SEAL's head lolled toward her. Through the blood and the grime, a flicker of recognition lit up his dying eyes. The tension in his arm didn't release, but his breathing hitched. "Ghost," he rasped. "You found me." "I'm here, Dec. I'm here." She walked right up to the table, stepping between the police and the bed. She looked at the shard of metal pressed against Dr. Finch's neck. "You can let him go now, Commander. Asset is secure." Declan's hand trembled. "Protocol 9. Can't let them see." "I know," Sarah said softly. She reached out and placed her hand over his blood-stained fist. "I'm the only one who touches you, just like the Chimera run. Remember?" "Chimera," he whispered. The metal clattered to the floor. Finch scrambled back, gasping, clutching his neck. "Arrest him! Shoot him!" he screamed, scrambling for the door. "He tried to kill me." "Everyone out!" Sarah yelled, spinning around. She grabbed the ambu bag and slammed it over Declan's face. "Finch, get out! Everyone out except 2 nurses. Baker, Nguyen. Stay. The rest of you, leave." "You can't order us," a resident started. "He has a pressurized explosive charge embedded in his chest cavity, next to the bullet," Sarah lied. It was a smooth, effortless lie. "If you use the Bovie cauterizer or defibrillate him blindly, he blows this whole wing up. You want to stay and find out? Get out!" The mention of explosive did what a gun couldn't. The room cleared in seconds. The cops dragged a protesting Finch into the hallway. Sarah hit the lock button on the sliding glass doors. She turned back to Declan. He was crashing. "Baker, cut the fluids!" Sarah barked, her hands moving with a speed that made the 2 remaining nurses dizzy. "We don't pump him full of saline. We dilute the clotting factors. We need whole blood. Run to the bank, override code O'Connell 7. If they deny you, tell them I'll burn the lab down." "Sarah," Nurse Nguyen stammered, staring at her friend. "What is going on? Who is he?" Sarah ripped open a sterile pack, bypassing standard procedure. She didn't wait for a surgeon. She grabbed a scalpel. "He's the man who saved my life when I was dead," Sarah said, making a precise incision between Declan's ribs to insert a chest tube. "And now I'm going to return the favor. But you need to listen to me. Whatever you see in the next hour, whatever scars you see, whatever he says, it never leaves this room. Do you understand?" Nurse Nguyen nodded, terrified. Sarah looked down at Declan. His chest was a mess, but it wasn't just the bullets. As she cut away the undershirt, she saw it. The branding. Right over his heart, scarred and burnished into the skin, was a symbol that didn't belong in a civilian hospital. A black sun. And below the wound, under the skin of his abdomen, something was blinking. A faint, rhythmic blue light shining through the flesh. "Oh my God," Baker whispered, returning with the blood. "What is inside him?" "Not what," Sarah said, her face grim as she clamped a bleeder with no hesitation. "It's a who. He's not just a soldier, Baker. He's a vault." Sarah looked at the monitor. Asystole, flatline. "No, you don't," she hissed. She didn't reach for the paddles. She climbed onto the gurney, straddling the massive soldier, and drove the heel of her hand into his sternum. "You don't die on me, Declan Hayes. Not after what we did to survive." She began compressions, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. "Come on, Dec. Come back to the fight." The blue light under his skin began to pulse faster, syncing with her compressions. "What is that light?" Nguyen cried. "It's a biometric kill switch," Sarah grunted, sweat dripping down her nose. "If his heart stops for more than 2 minutes, the device in his gut releases a neurotoxin. It kills everyone in a 100-foot radius." Baker dropped the blood bag. "What? So don't let him die," Sarah screamed, pumping harder. "Push the EPI. Push it now." The drama had just begun. The bullets were the least of their problems. The monitor beeped once. Then again, a weak, thready rhythm, but a rhythm nonetheless. "Sinus bradycardia," Nurse Nguyen whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. Rate is 45. He's back. Sarah stopped compressions, her chest heaving. She didn't step down from the gurney. She kept her hand pressed over the blue light pulsing beneath Declan Hayes' skin. The frantic strobing of the device slowed to a steady, rhythmic glow, matching his heartbeat. Is the neurotoxin safe? Nurse Baker asked, her voice trembling as she backed away toward the supply cabinets. Sarah looked at the two terrified nurses, then at the locked glass doors, where Dr. Finch and the police officers were shouting and pounding for entry. She climbed off the gurney, her face unreadable. "There is no neurotoxin," Sarah said calmly. Baker blinked. "What?" "I lied," Sarah said, grabbing a handful of gauze to pack the open chest wound. "I needed the room clear. Finch would have killed him with his ego, and the cops would have cuffed him while he bled out. Fear is the only thing that moves people fast enough." "You lied." Nguyen looked from the door to Sarah. "Sarah, you just threatened to blow up the hospital. SWAT is going to breach that door in 5 minutes. "Then we have 5 minutes," Sarah said. She moved to the crash cart and ripped open a drawer, not looking for medicine, but for tools. She grabbed a heavy steel oxygen tank wrench. "And that blue light isn't a bomb. It's worse." "Worse?" "It's a subdermal transponder." "A beacon," Sarah explained, her fingers working fast to secure the dressing on Declan. "It connects to a satellite network. As long as his heart beats, it sends a live signal. If he dies, it sends a fail signal. But here's the catch. It also acts as a homing device for the people who put it there. They know exactly where he is. To the inch." Declan groaned on the table. His hand shot out, grabbing Sarah's wrist. His grip was weak, but desperate. "Ghost," he rasped, his eyes unfocused. "Blackwood. They're sanitizing." Sarah froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking paler than the patient. "Blackwood?" Sarah whispered. "Dec, are you sure?" "They burned the safe house," Declan coughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Protocol 9. No witnesses." Sarah turned to the nurses. Her demeanor shifted from medical professional to something cold and terrifyingly efficient. "Listen to me," Sarah said, locking eyes with Nguyen. "You have kids, right? 2 girls." Nguyen nodded, tears welling up. "Go to the break room. Take Baker. Lock the door. Do not come out until the state police, the uniformed state police, arrive. Do you understand? We can't leave you. Go!" Sarah roared. It was a command that brooked no argument. The 2 nurses fled through the rear supply door that connected to the pharmacy. Sarah was alone with the dying Seal. She looked at the glass doors. Dr. Finch was pointing at her, screaming something to a heavy-set SWAT officer who was preparing a battering ram. Sarah walked over to the door. She didn't unlock it. She picked up a dry erase marker from the whiteboard and wrote on the glass, backwards so they could read it. "Do not enter. Biohazard. Quarantine." It was another lie, but it would buy her 30 seconds of hesitation. She turned back to Declan. "Okay, Dec," she whispered, leaning over him. "Blackwood Private Security. If they're cleaning house, that means they're coming for the data you're carrying." "The drive," Declan gasped, tapping his stomach. "Not swallowed. Surgically implanted." Sarah cursed softly. The blue light. It wasn't just a tracker. It was the housing for a data drive. He had cut himself open, or someone had, to hide the evidence inside his own body. "I have to take it out," Sarah said. "If I don't, they'll cut you apart to get it. And I need to get that bullet out of your lung." "No, anesthesia," Declan gritted out. "Need to stay awake. Might need to shoot." Sarah looked at the tray of instruments. She looked at the door. The SWAT team was putting on gas masks. They weren't buying the biohazard sign anymore. "I can't operate here," Sarah said. "We're sitting ducks." She unlocked the wheels of the gurney. "Hold on, Commander. We're going for a ride." Sarah didn't head for the main doors. She slammed the gurney through the rear pharmacy exit, shattering a row of medication shelves as she took the corner too tight. The hospital PA system crackled. Code Silver. Armed assailant in the emergency department. Lockdown initiated. They think you're the shooter, Sarah muttered, pushing the heavy gurney down the service corridor. Her leg, the one she claimed was injured in a car accident, was burning. But she didn't limp. The limp was a cover, a way to lower expectations. Now she moved with the fluid grace of a jungle cat. "We're going," Declan wheezed. "Basement. The old MRI suite," Sarah said. "The walls are lead-lined. No thermal signals, no radio signals. If Blackwood has a drone up, they won't see us. If they have comms, they won't work." They reached the freight elevator. Sarah hit the button, but nothing happened. "Lockdown," she hissed. "They killed the elevators." A crash echoed from the floor above, glass shattering, automatic gunfire. It was distinct, suppressed carbines. "Thwip, thwip, thwip. They're here," Declan said. "Leave me, Sarah. You can ghost out. Disappear again." Sarah looked at him. For a second, she wasn't in a hospital in Virginia. She was back in the dust of Kandahar, 10 years ago. She saw the smoke, felt the heat of the burning Humvee. She remembered Declan dragging her broken body 3 miles through hostile territory, refusing to let go of her vest, even when the insurgents were closing in. "We don't leave family behind, Ghost," he had told her then. "Shut up, Dec," Sarah said softly. She grabbed a fire axe from the wall case, shattering the glass. She wedged the blade into the elevator doors and leaned back, her biceps straining. With a screech of metal, she forced the doors open 6 inches. Then a foot. The shaft was dark. The car was on the floor above. "Change of plan," Sarah said. She looked down the hall. A stairwell door labeled "Roof Access." "Up?" Declan asked. "They expect us to go to ground," Sarah said. "Mice go to holes. Birds go to the sky. We're going to the helipad." She couldn't push the gurney up the stairs. She looked at Declan. He was 6'4", 240 pounds of muscle and bone. She was 5'7". "Can you walk?" "If I have to." "You have to." She helped him up. He screamed, a guttural sound that he swallowed quickly. Blood soaked the fresh bandages instantly. He leaned heavy on her, his arm draped over her shoulders. They moved towards the stairwell. Suddenly the door at the end of the hallway, the one leading back to the ER lobby, burst open. 3 men entered. They didn't look like police. They wore black tactical gear with no insignias, high-cut ballistic helmets, and quad-lens night vision goggles flipped up. They moved with a terrifying silence. Blackwood contractors, the cleanup crew. "Target sighted," the point man said. His voice was mechanically amplified. "Corridor 4 south. He has a hostage." "No hostage," the second man said, raising his rifle. "Clean sweep. Drop the female." Sarah didn't hesitate. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She raised the oxygen tank wrench she had tucked into her waistband and threw it. It wasn't a desperate toss. It was a calculated projectile. The heavy steel wrench spun through the air and smashed into the overhead fluorescent light fixture directly above the mercenaries. The bulb exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. The hallway plunged into semi-darkness. "Flash out!" the point man yelled, his night vision blooming white-hot from the sudden change in light. In that split second of blindness, Sarah kicked the stairwell door open and dragged Declan through. "Go, go, go!" She slammed the door and jammed the fire axe through the handles, barring it. "That won't hold them," Declan grunted as they started climbing the concrete stairs. "It doesn't have to," Sarah said, hauling his weight up the first landing. "It just has to buy us time to get to the kill box." The stairwell was a concrete throat, swallowing the sound of their desperate ascent and amplifying the heavy boots of the kill squad below. Sarah O'Connell's shoulder burned. She was supporting nearly 2/3 of Declan Hayes' body weight. Every step was a battle against physics. Declan was no longer walking. He was dragging his feet, his combat boots scraping heavily against the anti-slip treads. They reached the 4th floor landing, surgical services and neuro-intervention. Declan's knees finally buckled. He didn't fall, he simply ceased to have the structural integrity to stand. He slid down the rough concrete wall, leaving a broad, wet smear of crimson on the white paint. "Sarah," he wheezed. The sound was wrong. It wasn't just a gasp. It was a high-pitched, wet whistle. "Air can't. Air." Sarah dropped to her knees, her hands flying to his neck. His trachea was deviated to the left, pushed aside by an invisible pressure. The veins in his neck were distended, roping out like blue cords against his pale, sweat-drenched skin. "Tension pneumothorax," Sarah diagnosed instantly, her mind shedding the panic and locking into clinical precision. "The bullet nicked the pleura. Air is trapping in your chest cavity. It's crushing your heart and your good lung." Bang! The fire axe Sarah had jammed into the door handles 3 floors down gave way with a sickening metallic screech. The heavy steel door slammed open against the concrete wall. "They're inside," Declan choked out, his eyes rolling back. "Leave. Me." "Shut up," Sarah hissed. She grabbed him by the tactical vest. "We are not dying in a stairwell." She looked at the heavy double doors leading to the surgical wing. She swiped her badge, the badge of a pediatric nurse who wasn't supposed to have access to this floor. The light blinked red. Access denied. "Damn it," she cursed. She stepped back and kicked the lock housing. It didn't budge. She looked at Declan, who was turning blue. She needed a key. She didn't have one, but she had a 9mm Sig Sauer she had taken from the mercenary in the lobby. She pressed the muzzle against the lock cylinder, turned her head away, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. The lock shattered. She shoved the doors open and dragged Declan through, leaving a trail of blood on the polished linoleum. She scanned the hallway. Or 1 was dark, or 2 was undergoing maintenance, or 3. The light above the door was green. Intraoperative MRI suite. "Perfect," she whispered. She dragged him inside. The room was massive, dominated by the hulking, donut-shaped cylinder of the 3 Tesla MRI machine in the center. The air was frigid, smelling of ozone and aggressive sterility. She hauled Declan onto the operating table. He was gasping like a fish out of water now, his chest heaving uselessly. "I have to decompress the chest," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the tiled room. "If I don't, your heart stops in 60 seconds. She didn't wait for him to nod. She ripped open the drawers of the anesthesia cart. She bypassed the drugs. She needed hardware. She grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath needle, a thick, long needle, usually used for rapid fluid resuscitation. "This is going to hurt," she said. She located the second intercostal space on his right side, mid-clavicular line. She didn't have time for lidocaine. She didn't have time to prep the skin. She drove the needle straight into his chest. Hiss, the sound was audible, like a tire valve being depressed. Trapped air rushed out of his chest cavity. Declan's eyes flew open, and he sucked in a massive, ragged breath that sounded like a sob. The color began to return to his face instantly. "Better?" Sarah asked, taping the catheter in place. "Yeah." Declan gritted his teeth, sweat pouring off him. "Now, the drive." "We have company first," Sarah said. She could hear them in the hallway. The thud-thud-thud of tactical movement. They weren't rushing anymore. They were clearing rooms. They knew their prey was cornered. Sarah looked around the OR. It was a kill box. 1 way in, 1 way out. If she tried to shoot it out with a pistol against body armor and assault rifles, she would lose. She needed an equalizer. Her eyes landed on the bottom shelf of the flammable storage cabinet. In an ultra-modern hospital, most volatile chemicals had been replaced, but St. Mary's was old, and the older surgeons still preferred certain solvents for cleaning adhesive residue off equipment. A liter bottle of diethyl ether. "Dec, can you hold a gun?" Sarah asked, moving fast. "Give it to me," Declan growled. He was weak, but his hands were steady. She handed him the cig. "Aim at the door. If anyone comes through who isn't me, you put 2 in their pelvis. Their vests will stop chest shots." Sarah grabbed the ether. She uncapped it and splashed the clear, pungent liquid across the threshold of the main door. The fumes rose instantly, sweet, cloying, and incredibly heavy. She moved back to the crash cart. She grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Charge to 360 joules, she muttered, twisting the dial. The machine whined, a high-pitched capacitor charge that set her teeth on edge. "Turn off the lights," Sarah commanded. Declan reached up and slapped the wall panel. The room plunged into darkness, save for the blinking lights of the life support machines and the glowing green ready light on the defibrillator paddles in Sarah's hands. The door handle jiggled. Silence. Then a shotgun blast blew the hinges off. The door kicked inward. Two beams of white light cut through the darkness. Weapon-mounted flashlights. The lasers swept the room. "Clear left," a voice rasped. "Moving in." The first mercenary stepped into the room. He stepped right into the puddle of ether. Sarah waited. She was crouched behind the instrument tray, 10 feet away. She wasn't Sarah the nurse anymore. She was the ghost of Kandahar. She breathed in, slow and deep. The second mercenary stepped in. "Now," she whispered. She threw the defibrillator paddles. She didn't aim for the men. She aimed for the metal surgical tray she had kicked onto the floor, right in the center of the ether pool. As the paddles hit the metal, she thumbed the discharge buttons on the handles. Crack whoosh! The spark was blue-white and hot. It met the heavy ether fumes and ignited instantly. A wall of blue and orange fire erupted from the floor, a concussive wave of heat that sucked the oxygen right out of the doorway. The mercenaries screamed, a raw, terrified sound, as the fire engulfed their legs and the lower half of their tactical gear. They scrambled backward into the hallway, swatting at the flames, their formation broken. "Fire in the hole!" one screamed. Sarah sprinted to the door, slammed it shut against the wall of smoke, and engaged the deadbolt. It wouldn't hold them forever. The Halon fire suppression system would trigger any second. But it bought them the time they didn't have. She ran back to the table. "Okay," she said, her hands shaking slightly before she forced them still. "I'm going in." She switched on the overhead surgical light, blindingly bright. "No anesthesia," Declan reminded her, gripping the rails of the bed. "I need to stay awake. Bite down on this." She shoved a roll of sterile gauze between his teeth. She picked up a #10 scalpel. The drive was implanted deep in the abdominal wall, beneath the oblique muscle. She could see the blue LED pulsing through his skin. It was frantic, syncing with the satellite request. She made the incision. Declan didn't scream. He made a guttural, animal noise deep in his throat, his back arching off the table. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the Sig Sauer, his finger discipline perfect even in agony. He kept his finger off the trigger. Blood welled up, dark and fast. Sarah worked with ruthless efficiency. She used a retractor to pull back the muscle tissue. "I see it," she said. "It's stitched to the fascia. I have to cut the sutures." The ceiling sprinklers hissed to life. Cold water rained down on them, mixing with the blood on the table, diluting the red into pink rivulets that ran onto the floor. The fire alarm blared, a rhythmic, deafening honk. Snip, snip. She reached in with her gloved fingers and pulled. The device, a black square the size of a matchbook, came free. "Got it," she gasped. Suddenly the door exploded inward, not from a shotgun, but from a breaching charge. The metal warped and flew across the room, clattering into the corner. A man stepped through the smoke and the falling water. He wasn't burning. He was huge, clad in heavy riot armor, wearing a gas mask that made him look like an insect. He raised a weapon, not a rifle, a customized .45 caliber pistol. "Drop it, Ghost," the voice boomed, muffled by the mask. He ripped the mask off. It was Kowalski, the paramedic, the man who had driven the ambulance, the man who had looked terrified in the trauma bay. Now he looked bored. "You," Sarah breathed. "You were the spotter." "Spotter, driver, executioner. The economy is tough, Sarah. Blackwood pays double what the county does." Kowalski stepped over the debris. "Give me the drive, and I'll put a bullet in his head quick. Don't, and I start shooting joints. Knees first, then elbows." Sarah looked at Declan. He was barely conscious, the gun in his hand wavering, too heavy to lift. He had lost too much blood. She looked at Kowalski. He was 10 feet away, too far to rush. She looked at the MRI machine behind him. "You want the drive?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. She held up the bloody black square. She let her shoulders slump, feigning total defeat. "Just, please don't kill me." "I'm not here for you, nurse. Just the hardware." Kowalski held out his hand. "Toss it." Sarah wound up. She looked like she was going to throw it to him. Instead, she threw it past him. She hurled the drive with a pitcher's precision straight into the open bore of the MRI machine. "No!" Kowalski screamed. Instinct took over. Greed took over. He lunged for it, diving toward the machine to catch the $1,000,000 payload before it hit the floor. "Now, Dec!" Sarah screamed. She didn't wait for Declan. She slammed her hand onto the wall console, hitting the emergency scan sequence. The MRI was a 3 Tesla magnet. It was always on. A superconducting magnetic field 60,000 times stronger than the Earth's magnetic field. But the gradient coils, when activated, they focused that power. Kowalski was wearing a tactical vest with steel trauma plates. He was carrying a steel .45 caliber pistol. He had steel-toed boots. As he dove into the zone 4 inches radius, the invisible hand of physics grabbed him. It wasn't a gentle pull. It was a violent, catastrophic seize. The gun was ripped from his hand first, flying into the bore of the magnet with the force of a cannonball. Then Kowalski followed. He screamed as he was lifted off his feet, flying backward through the air. He slammed against the face of the machine with a bone-shattering crunch. The steel plates in his vest were pinned to the magnet with thousands of pounds of force. He was butterflies pinned to a board, his ribs compressing under his own armor. "My chest!" he shrieked, struggling to move. He couldn't twitch a finger. The magnetic field held him frozen in a suspended animation of crushing pressure. The data drive, made of plastic, copper, and gold, clattered harmlessly to the floor, unaffected by the magnet. Sarah walked over. She picked up the drive. She looked at Kowalski, pinned helplessly against the humming white giant. "You should have paid attention during orientation, Kowalski," Sarah said, her voice cold as the water rained down on them. "MRI safety. No ferrous metals allowed." She walked back to Declan, grabbed the cig from his shaking hand, and tucked it into her waistband. "Surgery complete," she whispered, pulling Declan's arm over her shoulder. "Time to discharge the patient." The magnetic hum of the MRI machine faded behind them, replaced by the ominous silence of the service corridor. Inside the suite, Kowalski was still pinned against the superconductor, his screams muffled by the heavy, lead-lined door Sarah had sealed shut. She didn't feel triumph. She felt the crushing weight of exhaustion. Sarah O'Connell hooked her arm under Declan Hayes's shoulder, taking nearly all his weight. He was a dead man walking. The chest tube she had improvised was holding, but the blood loss was catastrophic. His skin was grey, clammy, and cold to the touch. "Stay with me, Dec," she whispered, her voice tight. "We're almost there." "Where?" Declan mumbled, his boots dragging heavily on the linoleum, leaving wet streaks of red and water. "Where is—" "There." "The roof," Sarah said. "The only place left." They reached the elevator bank. The main cars were locked down, displaying a flashing code silver warning. But Sarah knew the building codes. She knew that the trauma service elevator, Car 4, ran on a dedicated emergency circuit required by state law for moving critical patients during power outages. She punched the call button. It lit up. A soft, incongruous ding echoed in the hallway. The doors slid open. They stumbled inside, collapsing against the back wall as the doors hissed shut, sealing them in a steel box. Sarah hit the button marked H. The car jerked upward. For the first time in 40 minutes, they weren't being shot at. The silence was deafening. It was just the two of them, covered in blood, smelling of ether, ozone, and fear. Declan slid down the wall to a sitting position, his head lolling back. He looked at Sarah. He really looked at her. not as a medic, but as the woman he had known in a different life. "You got old, Ghost," he whispered, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. Sarah checked the magazine of the Sig Sauer she had taken from the mercenary. 7 rounds, that was it. 10 years tends to do that to people, Dec, she said, her voice cracking slightly. She wiped a smear of grease from her forehead. It's been a long time since Kandahar. Why? Declan asked. The question hung in the air, heavier than the gun smoke. Why did you run? We looked for you. I looked for you. For 3 years. Everyone said you were dead. Killed in the extraction. Sarah looked at the floor indicator numbers climbing. 4, 5, 6. I didn't run because I wanted to, Sarah said softly. I ran because Blackwood gave me a choice. They showed me photos, Dec. Photos of my sister in Ohio. Photos of her kids walking to school. They said if I ever spoke about what we found in that safe house, the Protocol 9 files, they wouldn't just kill me, they'd erase my entire family tree. Declan's eyes hardened. So you buried the ghost. I became Sarah O'Connell, she said, tears pricking her eyes for the first time that night. I learned to knit, I learned to bake, I unclogged feeding tubes and held the hands of dying old men. I tried to forget that I knew how to kill a man with a ballpoint pen. You didn't forget, Declan said, glancing at the gun in her hand. No, Sarah whispered. I guess I didn't. The elevator chimed. Roof access. Ready? Sarah asked, hauling him up. No, Declan groaned, standing on shaking legs. Let's do it. The doors opened and the world exploded. They were hit instantly by a wall of wind and water. A nor'easter was hammering the Virginia coast. The rain wasn't falling. It was being driven sideways like shrapnel. The wind howled across the exposed concrete of the helipad, tearing at their clothes. But the storm wasn't the loudest thing on the roof. 50 yards away, in the center of the painted red cross, sat a massive, matte black helicopter. Its rotors were spinning, chopping the air with a rhythmic, thumping bass that vibrated in Sarah's chest. It had no navigation lights, no tail number. It was a ghost machine. Standing at the base of the helicopter's ramp was a figure in a long, dark trench coat that whipped violently in the wind. He was flanked by 4 operators, Blackwood elites. They stood like statues, their rifles raised, lasers cutting through the rain. It was Rourke, the architect of the purge. Sarah walked out into the storm. She didn't cower. She didn't hide. She walked with the defiance of someone who had run out of runway. She stopped 20 paces from them. The floodlights from the helicopter snapped on, blinding them, turning the rain into a curtain of white diamonds. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the radio she had taken from Kowalski. End of the line, Ghost. Rourke's voice crackled in her earpiece. He wasn't shouting. He was speaking into a headset, his voice calm, digitized, and terrifyingly clear. Sarah pressed the transmit button. It doesn't have to be, Rourke. You can still walk away. Rourke laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He stepped forward, the rain sluicing off his coat. Walk away? Rourke smiled. I have a heavy lift extract chopper. I have 4 Tier 1 operators. I have air superiority. You have a handgun with half a magazine and a dying man. You aren't in a position to negotiate, Sarah. You're in a position to beg. Declan sagged against her, his weight becoming unmanageable. Sarah, give him the drive. He's right, Sarah said into the radio. I can't fight you. Smart girl, Rourke nodded. Bring me the asset. We'll take the drive and we'll take Commander Hayes. You? You can jump off the roof. It'll be cleaner that way. Sarah looked at the 4 rifles pointed at her chest. She looked at the dark sky above them, thick with storm clouds. I'm not giving you the drive, Rourke, Sarah yelled over the roar of the rotors. Then you die, Rourke signaled his men. The lasers centered on her forehead. I'm not giving it to you, Sarah continued, her voice rising to a scream that cut through the storm, because I already gave it to them. She reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out the black data square. But she didn't offer it to Rourke. She held it straight up, pressing her thumb against the biometric scanner on the back. The blue light on the drive turned a solid, angry red. Rourke paused. He frowned. "What is that?" "You guys are so obsessed with your satellite trackers," Sarah shouted. "You forgot what else is up there. This isn't just a storage drive, Rourke. It's a transponder." "Kill her!" Rourke screamed, realizing too late what the red light meant. "Take the shot!" The 4 operators squeezed their triggers. Boom! It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of the sky tearing open. A pressure wave slammed onto the roof, knocking Rourke off his feet. The rain seemed to stop mid-air, vaporized by a sudden, intense heat. A beam of light, brighter than the sun, brighter than the helicopter's floods, a thick column of infrared search and track illumination, punched through the clouds from directly overhead. It pinned the Blackwood helicopter to the roof like a specimen on a slide. The air vibrated with a sound that was less like an engine and more like the growl of a dragon. Hovering just above the storm ceiling, hidden until this exact second, was an AC-130J Ghost Rider gunship. The radio in Sarah's ear crackled again, but this time it wasn't Rourke. It was a voice that sounded like gravel and thunder. "This is Reaper 1. 1 on station. We have visual on the target. Hostiles identified. Danger close." Rourke scrambled to his knees, looking up in sheer terror. He knew that sound. He knew that silhouette. The 105 howitzer barrel protruding from the side of the aircraft was tracking him. "Attention Blackwood personnel," the voice from the sky boomed over a loudspeaker that drowned out the storm. "By order of the Department of Defense, you are designated as enemy combatants. Lay down your weapons immediately, or you will be vaporized." Sarah hadn't just broadcast the data. She had used the transponder code Declan carried to flag a Broken Arrow event, a signal that indicates a U.S. military asset is compromised and in immediate danger of capture by hostile forces. It bypassed the police. It bypassed the FBI. It went straight to Special Operations Command. She hadn't called the cops. She had called the god of war. "You see, Rourke." Sarah screamed, laughing hysterically as the adrenaline flooded her system. "You're playing for a paycheck. We're playing for keeps." A second helicopter, this one a Navy MH-60 Nighthawk, banked around the side of the hospital building, its side doors open, miniguns spun up and trained on Rourke's men. "Weapons down! Now! Now! Now!" the PA system bellowed. Rourke looked at his helicopter. The pilot was already raising his hands in the cockpit. Rourke looked at Sarah. He slowly unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop to the wet concrete. His men followed suit, dropping their rifles as if they were made of burning coal. As the Navy tactical team fast-roped down to the roof, sliding down the lines with fluid precision to tackle and cuff the mercenaries, Sarah felt the strength finally leave her legs. She collapsed. Declan went down with her. They hit the wet concrete together, a tangle of limbs and blood. A Navy corpsman hit the deck next to them before they even stopped moving. "Commander Hayes, ma'am, status?" Declan looked up at the corpsman. He was pale, shaking and bleeding, but his eyes were clear. He reached out and took Sarah's hand, the hand that was trembling uncontrollably now that the danger was over. "I'm fine," Declan rasped, squeezing her fingers. "My nurse. She saved me." Sarah looked at the chaos around them. The flashing lights, the shouting soldiers, the cuffed mercenaries being dragged away. She looked down at her scrubs, ruined, stained with the blood of a man she thought she'd lost 10 years ago. "Ma'am?" the corpsman asked, checking her pupils. "Are you injured? Can you tell me your name?" Sarah took a deep breath of the cold, rain-filled air. She looked at Declan, and for the first time in a decade, the shadow that had been following her was gone. "My name," she said, her voice steady and strong, "is Sarah, and I used to work here." Declan laughed, a wet, choking sound. "Used to?" "Yeah," Sarah smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder as the medic began to cut away his vest. "I think I'm going to need a new job. St. Mary's has a strict policy against destroying MRI machines." The rain kept falling, washing the blood from the roof, but Sarah didn't feel the cold anymore. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Sarah O'Connell never returned to her shift at St. Mary's. Her locker was cleared out by federal agents the next morning, and her car was towed from the employee lot. The official hospital report stated she was transferred to an out-of-state facility for specialized trauma care, but none of the staff ever saw her again. Blackwood Security was dismantled 3 months later. The data drive Sarah recovered contained the Protocol 9 inches ledger, evidence of illegal Black Ops hits on U.S. soil. The leak led to 34 high-profile arrests and the collapse of a billion-dollar defense contractor. Declan Hayes made a full recovery. He didn't retire. Rumors in the darker corners of the special operations community now speak of a new asset team operating off the books. They say the team consists of a battered, unbreakable SEAL and a woman who moves like a phantom. A woman who carries a medical kit in one hand and a sniper rifle in the other. They say she's a healer first. But if you hurt the innocent, she's the one who stops the heartbeats. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of the night the hospital stopped. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the soldier holding the gun. It's the nurse holding the secrets. If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more thrillers like this. Do you think Sarah was right to hide for so long? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of survival, betrayal, and justice. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.